So now that you've had a chance to play around a little bit with exposure and you've been able to go out and apply that actually underground, now you did shoot the assignment, right? Because if you didn't shoot the assignment, you need to turn off the video and you need to go shoot the freaking assignment. You know, the last thing that I want is for you to go through, spend all this time watching these videos, go underground, pull out your camera, shoot a shot, and be like, what the crap? Like, what the crap? My picture didn't turn out. I watched all these videos. I spent all this time watching these videos and I can't even get a shot underground. Like, that would break my heart to have that happen. You know, it kind of reminds me of my brother. He used to teach snowboarding lessons up at Park City Ski Resort. And he would get these kids in his class and they would like strap the snowboard on and then they would fall flat on their butt. And then they would slide down the mountain on their butt. And the whole time they'd be like, what's going on here? Like, I spent hours playing Super Snowboarder Pro on PlayStation, and I can do backflips and I can do 360s, and you're a bad teacher because I can't do any of that here. And he usually, you know, he chuckles at him. And anyway, I think you get the point. You're not going to learn, you're not going to grow, you're not going to become better as a cave photographer unless you apply the concepts that we learn at every level that we learn them. So it's so important that you go out and you shoot these assignments. And it's hard work. I know that last assignment, for those of you who did shoot it, it was a very technical assignment, kind of boring to just go out and try to light up a shot where you're not trying to make a good picture, you're just trying to get a good exposure. So you look at your pictures and maybe they're not that great, they're exposed well, but they don't look that great. I mean, that's a lot of work and it's kind of painful to go through that process. But I think those of you who shot it found that being able to master that exposure, or you will find, it's going to take you to a whole nother level when we get into more of the creative aspects of lighting. So again, if you haven't shot the assignment, turn off the video, go shoot the assignment, come back and join us so that we can all grow together. Now, for those of you who did shoot the exposure assignment, I think you're going to find as we move forward that knowledge that you've gained is really going to serve you well. So with that said, today we are going to be talking about lighting. We're going to talk about how to manipulate light so that you can create, for those who view your photos, an emotional experience. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when you go underground and you see this massive borehole or this beautiful, like beautifully decorated formation passage, when you see it, I mean, that's a really cool experience. And then to go out and, you know, a typical caver that takes a picture, you go out and you show it and you're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of cool. There's some cool formations. But you've seen those great shots where the lighting is phenomenal and the formations are just like, wow. We're going to talk about how you do that. And you do that, one way you do that is by controlling the direction of light. Now, before we jump into that, one thing that I need to tell you is that in order to move to this next level, you need to get that flash off your camera. And if you can't take it off, then find a way to turn it off. And if you can't turn it off, then you can get some black, electrical tape or duct tape. Tape it down so it doesn't pop up, or if it's just built-in flash, cover it up so it doesn't fire if you can't turn it off. It's important that that happen because if the camera tries to control the light, it's going to really, detract from your photos and kind of mess up your shots. So get that light off your camera somehow. Step one. Okay, once you've done that, you are now ready to move on to lighting. And the first thing, we're going to talk about the 3 directions of lighting. The first of those is front light. Front light is basically light that's emanating from your camera, the light I just told you to turn off. And it could be coming directly from your camera, or maybe it's coming from the region around your camera. If you found a way to disconnect the flash, if you have a flash that's going off anywhere in this region of your camera, or maybe up here or whatever, but it's pointing directly towards your subject, that is front light. Now, the problem with front light is that, first of all, it washes out all of the shadows. And when you wash out the shadows, you start to impact the perspective of the shot. The distance between things becomes a little difficult to tell. Is that 10 feet away, or is it 100 feet away, or is it 3 feet away? Sometimes it can really mess up that perspective and that distance. The other thing is that when the light emanates from the front, where are all the shadows? They're behind the object, so you have no shadows. And shadows are what give you texture, what give you depth of the photograph. So it makes a very flat photograph. The other problem with front light is because of the way light falls off, the inverse square law. Generally, the areas in the front where the light hits they're really hot. They're kind of blown out and too bright. And then as the light falls off, it becomes kind of muddy-ish and dark, but not quite dark enough that it seems natural dark. It's kind of an awkward, uncomfortable darkness and an awkward, uncomfortable light. And there's a middle zone where everything's kind of okay. So, we're going to try to avoid front light. There is a time and a place for front light, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But for now, we need to try to avoid that front light, although you will be experimenting with it just so you can see the effect it has in the assignment. So that's front light. And let's take a look at a couple of photos so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about here. All right, so in this first shot, there are 2 of the 3 problems present that you get when you use front light. The first is the lack of texture. Now you look at this picture and you say, well, wait a second, what do you mean? Like I'm looking at the shot and the texture looks like rock. Well, yeah, but what you don't see in this shot are those hundreds or thousands of sharp chert nodules that are sticking out of the rock all over the place. There's a bunch of really small, thin nodules that are really fragile all over that rock face. And you don't get it because there are no shadows. You just don't see it. The other problem that you get is that lack of distance perception. So when you look at this shot, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, is that passage or that dark space above the caver's head? I mean, is that looking up a 100-foot pit, or is that just a hole that's a few feet away? It's really hard to tell that. The reality is it's just 2 or 3 feet away. There's a small fissure that goes up and maybe goes up like 8 feet or so, and then you break into a tight crawly passage up above there. So it's really hard to see that because of the front light. Now in this next shot, you can see all 3 of the problems created by front light. The first is that you'll notice in the top of the photo, it's sort of blown out. Like that light fall off where you get the more intense light there in the foreground kind of blows out the light. And then as you look farther down the passage towards the bottom of the shot, that dark passage in the background is kind of a muddy dark. I mean, you want to be able to see what's in the shadows, but you just can't quite make it out. And it just feels overall awkward with the blowout and then the faded dark in the background. And then in the middle, it looks okay, but again, you lose that texture. It's hard to notice in this shot that texture of the wall right there is really totally loaded with all kinds of quill anthodites just all over the place in that passage. But it becomes, again, hard to make out because, you don't have that texture there. And in the final shot here, again, we see sort of, those 3 different elements, although the first one not quite as much with the blowout, although you do look in the foreground towards the bottom there, and that foreground looks maybe a little bit uncomfortably bright, and then off into the background of the passage, it's uncomfortably not quite totally dark. So, that muddy look again. And the texture, you can, of course, see the texture of those, the columns there on the left-hand side, but that texture can be enhanced so much more by using side light. All right, the next lighting direction that we need to talk about is side light. Side light is basically where light is emanating from the side of your subject or your object. So this right here it's to the side of me, but it's not side light. This is front light because the flash is pointing straight onto my subject. This, however, if I'm the subject, is side light. And this is the side, This could be side lighting. This over here could be side lighting. Up here could be side lighting. And here 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 and all over the place. So you get the point. There are endless directions or endless positions for side light as long as it is coming from the side. And now the cool thing about side light is that that is where you have control over the shadows and the shape of the shadows. And the shape of the shadows is a pretty important part of your photograph. And the other thing you have control of is the texture. The more you move from front to side light, the more that texture starts to come out and appear. And the farther you move, the more deep that texture becomes. So you're able to control texture and you're able to control shadows. Now, one thing that I do want to say with side light is please don't settle. Don't have, set up your camera and then you have your buddy walk over there and hold up the light right there. Bam, side light. We're good. Okay, we've completed that part of the assignment or that part of what we're trying to accomplish, and you move on. Don't do it because from this to this could dramatically impact your photograph. So as you're out there, one thing that I like to do is take a flashlight and sort of model that. So I'll shine the light on the subject and kind of move it around. And in fact, we're going to show you this in just a second. So I'll move it around and then I might say, ooh, right there, right there, right there. That looked really good. And then I'll swap it out for the flash, hold it right there, and then fire it off. So it's good to explore different positions of the light because you may find that from here to here totally makes or breaks the photograph. Or maybe over here looks significantly better when it comes to side light. Or maybe if I tilt it a little bit this direction or this direction just slightly, 30, 45 degrees, that also could dramatically impact the scene. So never settle for the very first position you put your flash in. Experiment, move around, try multiple shots and see what you can come up with. And you may find that a hidden gem is just inches away or a slight adjustment. So that's side light. Let's take a look at some examples of side lighting and show you what that can do. And then we'll talk about the third direction of lighting. All right, so this first shot, not side light. This is front light. But the reason I want to show you this is I want you to see what side light does by just shifting that flash, just a little bit. So again, front light, side light. Do you see the difference? Do you see what happened there? Notice how that texture really starts to pop out and how you start to get shadows in your photograph that start to become a pretty significant element of your photograph. And those shadows aren't those muddy kind of, ugly looking shadows, but they become really interesting shadows. They can also become a bit of a problem because of, how those shadows look and how much space they occupy. So in this shot, it works pretty well. Although in the middle, I'm a little uncomfortable with kind of the size of that shadow. There's stuff in there that maybe I want to see, but I can't see. What happens if I shift my light just a little bit? Whoa. Okay, now I've got huge shadow problems. But yet that bottom part of the shot is really cool. So let's go ahead and shift our light maybe just a little bit more and see what happens. Ooh, now that's getting nice. Suddenly those shadows now that were a little bit problematic are gone just by moving that side light maybe to the other side of the formation. Let's shift it again and see what happens. Ooh, yeah, that's not working so well because I'm really not seeing any of the formation there, just a little bit of the wall. All right, one more little shift. Not too bad. Yeah, that's looking nice, but again, I've got quite a bit of shadow. So let's maybe move it just a little bit closer to the camera, but keep it in that position. Wow, so much better. I hope that as you look at this, you can see the value of not settling on that first position, but in changing just ever so slightly the position, and that by doing that, you can have significantly different pictures with side light. And like I said before, you can find a real gem just by making those subtle adjustments. All right, so the third and final light direction is backlight. And backlight is where it's emanating from behind your subject or object, whether that's a caver or a formation or a passage or whatever. It's coming from behind. So the flash is basically pointing towards the camera. Now, when the flash is pointing towards the camera, what do you need to watch out for? You know from the basic photography course, you need to watch out for lens flare. So if I take this flash and I'm pointing it directly at the camera and it fires off, you're going to have these little bubbly things depending on how your lens is, the quality of your lens, all over the place. And that could kind of mess it up. So you want to be careful to either find a way to shadow that, so it's not hitting the camera. You can do that from the camera and kind of block it with your hand, or you can find a little object to kind of hide the flash behind, but yet still point it back behind your subject. And behind could be anywhere from right back here, directly behind me, or it could be off to the side a little bit, so over here, but still pointing back towards me. Once you start moving like that, you're at side light. But back over here, you're doing backlight. And again, you could do all kinds of directions: up, down, over, back, behind, up at an angle. And just like in side light, every subtle movement is going to dramatically impact the shot. So, I mean, for example, look at me right now. I've got some studio lights on me here. And if I slightly adjust this one that's giving me some backlight, see what's happening there? Subtle adjustments make a big difference to the photograph. If I go like that, wow, that really blows it out. So anyway, you get the point. You've got a lot of different directions to play with when it comes to backlight and side light. Now, the beauty of backlight is the contrast. And the interesting thing is that the more you move from front light to side light to backlight, the stronger and more powerful the contrast becomes, the contrast of light. So the lightness and the darkness of the light. That's probably the reason why, if you look at a lot of these caver shots, in the magazines where it's backlit, it's just like, whoa, because you get this bright kind of halo rim of light against blackness in the background. That's where it's not lit up. And that strong black and light makes really, really strong contrast. And the more intense the contrast is, the more intense the photograph feels. So that's key when it comes to creating an emotional experience. How intense does it feel? Side light, not quite as intense, but you bring out that texture of the subject, and that's important as well. So you can see beyond just light direction, there's an emotional impact that comes with where that light is positioned. So as you take a look at this first shot, what was your emotional reaction to it? I mean, when you saw it, were you like, oh yeah, another shot? Or was it like, whoa, that's really cool? For me, when I look at it, I get the latter. I look at this and say, wow, that is a really intense shot. And part of that intensity is what we just talked about, that contrast. Notice how you get the brights of the highlights that are around the caver that are illuminating the water droplets that you can kind of see falling down, and then the intensity and the depth of those shadows. It's that contrast that creates the power when it comes to backlight. Now, this next shot that I show you with backlight isn't quite as intense. And part of the reason for that is because what we talked about with side light is that you really have to be aware of those shadows. Subtle movements in the flash can kind of make or break the shot. And here in this shot, there is so much shadow that the backlight effect sort of gets lost. But yet, at the same time, it doesn't. Because when you look at like that rim light of the silhouette of the caver, I mean, that part right there is fairly powerful. So maybe by itself, this shot isn't a super powerful shot because of the prolificness, if that's a word, of the shadows. I mean, you get a lot of shadows in there. But when we move later on through the course, we're going to talk about combining multiple lights and how you can then bring out those shadows. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But I think you can see here that shadows, when it comes to backlight or side light or even front light for that matter, are just as important as the light itself. All right, so the last thing that I want to do now is actually go underground with you. And this video clip that I'm going to show you is walking through, sort of doing like a preliminary test of the lighting to see where I really want to position the flash at. So I've gone in with a flashlight. You can use your headlamp or a bright flashlight or whatever you want to do. And I'm basically having my friend who was with me kind of walk through with that light, shine it around at different angles and directions, just so that I can see sort of how the light is behaving as he walks through and where is the magic spot that I need to hold my flash to get a really good picture. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump underground, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the assignment for this lesson. All right, so we begin with just some basic front light. Once we get the camera set up and we got the caver in position to walk through the passage. And I want you to notice particularly as he walks through and shines his light around, how those subtle changes in his position or the slight movements of his head can dramatically impact, the overall look and feel of the photograph. And what this gives you is a really good starting point for figuring out where do you need to put your flashes, just when you start off. It's one thing to go in there and, just set up your camera and walk through and pop the flashes, have your buddies pop flashes and just hope, it's going to look okay and make adjustments from there. But it's really nice to go through this process here and, get a really good sense of, if I put the flash here pointing in this direction, I'm going to get this light. So you've got a solid starting point. The other thing that's beautiful about this process, about doing this, is that it allows you to stop, not worry about, getting a great shot, but just stop, sit, and enjoy watching the light as it moves through the cave. The more you can enjoy this process, the more powerful I think your pictures will become. Now notice right here, those subtle movements of the light, that backlight, how it will illuminate the flow stone on the left. Right there, you're just seeing the flow stone. But just a subtle shift with that light, and now we're capturing some of the background as well. So those subtle movements, like I said, they really make a difference. Also notice how the side light looks there on the background. It's kind of cool. So we just continue watching as he moves through the background, shines a light, and you can instruct them as they go through. In fact, I would encourage you to do that. I didn't just tell him to wander through, just shine the light wherever and see what happens. So that's really cool right there. Sort of that rim light along the caver. That might be something really worth playing with, but I'm going to have to watch out for the lens flare, because with that light pointed directly at the camera, that's going to be a problem. So maybe what I do is instruct him and say, hey, you know what, that looks awesome. Can you move down, move your light down just a little bit, or could you move off to the side? Because I want to see if we can find a good position where we can get that rim light, but I'm not seeing the bright light of your headlamp or the flash when we fire it off. So again, you can coach them, you can instruct them as they're going through. I typically have them wander down their ways and then turn around and start walking back, because sometimes those movements coming back, you can get some things that weren't happening as they were going forward through the cave and just stopping and turning around. So every little movement matters as you're kind of going through this process. Now I have him stop and I'm trying to figure out, well, where am I going to put the light to light up my caver friend who's going to be the model in the shot? So I have him stand up there, shine the light down. How is that looking? What if you shift left or right, or you move your height, you're just going to squat down or whatever. You could have him do that. So there's lots of subtle things that you can have them do as they're wandering through. But more than anything, like I said, it's really important that you really just learn to enjoy this and learn to slow down, to see the light, and to understand the impact that it's going to have depending on where that sits in your photograph. All right, let's go ahead and review this assignment. So now that you've mastered exposure, it's time for you to start unlocking your potential. In this assignment, you're going to play with lighting direction with a single light source. So if you have 3 flashes, you're only going to use 1 flash. That's it, single light source. The most important thing that you can do to improve your cave photography, like we've said, is get that flash off your camera. Once you have it off, though, the secret is knowing what to do with that. And so in this assignment, you're going to play with lighting direction to see what effect the light has on your photograph coming from multiple different directions. So what you're going to master is those 3 primary directions and the impact they have on your photographs. The assignment checklist is this. So what I want you to do is to select 4 subjects, and those subjects need to be a caver, a formation, a room, and a passage. 4 different things, because this gives you variety and allows you to play with it under different circumstances. A caver is going to be different to light than a formation and a room and a passage. So 4 different things. You may need to refine the exposure each time that you adjust the light, so feel free to do that. You have now mastered exposure, and you have the liberty to go ahead and adjust that. You should have one of each of the below items that is properly exposed, so not too light, not too dark, just right. So after you're done, even if you take 30 or 40 shots, you need to make sure that you have one good shot for each of the following check items. So you're going to need a caver that is front lit, a caver that is side lit from at least 6 different sides. Remember, there's endless number of sides, so you're going to play with different sides on that caver. And this is going to be 6 separate shots. Last of all, a caver that is backlit. And with backlighting, you can play with direction, with multiple directions, just like you did with side light. Not required here for the assignment, but I would encourage you to do that, because remember, backlit from here versus backlit from here or right behind it could have a totally different effect, and it could pleasantly surprise you. So caver, a formation that's front lit, backlit, and side lit, a room that's front lit, side lit, and backlit, and a passage that's front lit, side lit, and backlit. So you're going to check those off, go ahead and shoot the whole assignment, and then when you're done, again, there's a reflection component, because you need to look at your work critically and figure out what worked, what didn't work, what do I need to do better, what did I really like, how do I replicate that sort of thing. So the questions you're going to reflect on, first of all, did you find that a particular light direction worked better with certain subjects? And why was that? Why was it better? What is better? Because I like this one because it just felt more energetic to me. Or, what is better? Try to describe that. So number 2, why might it be a good idea not to settle with the first position you place your flash? This is to, again, emphasize, hopefully as you go out and you shoot, you realize, whoa, I moved like a foot on the flash, and it made a huge difference in my final photograph. So look at that, see if you can see how subtle movements impact and change the overall feel of your photograph. Third, if there was anything that didn't work out, what happened and how would you make it work in the future, or what type of situations do you need to avoid? That's important to reflect on, because you want to learn from this so that when you go out the next time, you run into fewer problems and you walk away with more really good shots. So that's important. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is page 2 on the assignment, and that is the exposure log. Make sure to fill this out. I know it's kind of a pain to do this, but it gives you more data for reflecting on. If you come back and you look at your shots, you're like, whoa, that really didn't work out. Like the exposure is way off, or the light's really weird. You can go to your exposure log and say, what exactly did I do in that shot? And that helps you to, realize what you need to do moving forward to not make those same mistakes. So it just gives you another piece of data to make good decisions and reflect and critically look at your work. All right, you know what? I think that's it on the assignment. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this, and you're going to get some really good results. In the next video, what we're going to be talking about is filling in the shadows. You'll find that as you're out shooting this assignment, that your light looks significantly better, but your shadows, sometimes there may be detail in there that's not showing up that you really wish did. How do we overcome that? That's what we're going to talk about next, but before you move on, go shoot the assignment. We'll see you in the next video.